Laudetur Jesus Christus. Today I want to continue with the 50 minutes of Latin a day, and I want to speak about passive verbs. Passive verbs. We distinguish two types of verbs. We have active verbs, as for example, I see you. That's an active verb because I am seeing. But a passive mode would be I am seen by you. There I am not the subject who is performing an action. So the distinction is between I see and I am seen, or I hear and I am heard, or I love and I am loved. Now we can notice that in English we use auxiliary words to convey the notion of a passive verb. So we use three little words. I have to say I am seen or I am heard. In Latin, again, as in previous examples we have seen, instead of using auxiliary words, we change the ending, a different suffix. There are specific passive verb endings in Latin. So let's look at those. You may recall that we were covering 4 different types of verbs: laudare, videre, dicere, and audire. And we were looking at the endings, personal endings in present tense. For example, laudo, laudas, laudat, laudamus, laudatis, laudant. And we have seen that the endings are o, s, t, mus, tis, ant. Laudo, laudas, laudat, laudamus, laudatis, laudant. For passive verbs, the endings are or, ris, tur, mur, mini, antur. These are the present tense passive endings, personal endings. So I am praised, you are praised, he, she, or it is praised, we are praised, you all are praised, and they are praised. In Latin would be laudor, laudaris, laudatur, laudamur, laudamini, laudantur. For videre, to see, the forms will be videor, videris, videtur, videmur, videmini, videntur. So I am seen, you are seen, he is seen, etc. are expressed in Latin by saying videor, videris, videtur, videmur, videmini, videntur. The passive for dicere is dicor, diceris, dicitur, dicimur, dicimini, dicuntur. And the passive present tense for audire, to hear, is audior, audiris, auditur, audimur, audimini, audiuntur. So these are the present tense passive verbal forms with their specific endings. In the imperfect tenses, remember we had 3 imperfect tenses, the present, the past, and the future. The endings are similar. You may recall that the past imperfect tense of laudare was laudabam, laudabas, laudabat, laudabamus, laudabatis, laudabant. Those are the active forms. The passive forms, meaning I was being praised, you were being praised, he was being praised, and so on, these forms in Latin will be laudabar, laudabaris, laudabatur, laudabamur, laudabamini, laudabantur. And the future tense, which was laudabo, laudabis, laudabit in the active form, laudabo, laudabis, laudabit, laudabimus, laudabitis, laudabunt. The passive form is laudabor, laudaberis, laudabitur, laudabimur, laudabimini, laudabuntur. So let's look at the 4 verbs that we have been talking about in all their forms. The present passive is laudor, laudaris, laudatur, laudamur, laudamini, laudantur. To see is videor, videris, videtur, videmur, videmini, videntur. To say, to dicere is dicor, diceris, dicitur, dicimur, dicimini, dicuntur. And to hear, audire, the passive is audior, audiris, auditur, audimur, audimini, audiuntur. The imperfect past, again all of these are passive. For laudare is laudabar, laudabaris, laudabatur, laudabamur, laudabamini, laudabantur. For videre is videbar, videbaris, videbatur, videbamur, videbamini, videbantur. For dicere, dicebar, dicebaris, dicebatur, dicebamur, dicebamini, dicebantur. And for audire is audiebar, audiebaris, audiebatur, audiebamur, audiebamini, audiebantur. These are the simple past tense forms. And the future, the imperfect future, again in passive, is laudabor, laudaberis, laudabitur, laudabimur, laudabimini, laudabuntur. For videre is videbor, videberis, videbitur, videbimur, videbimini, videbuntur. I will be seen, you will be seen, he will be seen, and so on. For dicere, dicar, diceris, dicetur, dicemur, dicemini, dicentur. Again, these are very similar to the active future, but we are here using the passive, and therefore we are using the specific personal endings for that form. Dicar, diceris, dicetur, dicemur, dicemini, dicentur. And the future imperfect for audire is audiar, audieris, audietur, audiemur, audiemini, audientur. So these are the so-called imperfect tenses. And it's important to be familiarized with these forms, because without it, one can hardly make any progress in Latin. Some of this might be tedious, but it is highly important to be familiar with the elements of this language. Without that, one would be not making any significant progress, even though one might somehow try to bypass these exercises. This has to become part of one's repertory, so to speak. Now, the perfect tenses are easier because we use a combination of the past participle, laudatus or visus or dictus or auditus, and combine them with the appropriate form of the verb esse, to be. So I have been praised would be laudatus sum. And notice that with our English background, we might be inclined to think that laudatus sum means I am praised, but it means I was praised in past perfect tense, or I have been praised. Laudatus sum, and the entire sequence to going through all the persons again would be laudatus sum, laudatus es, laudatus est, or if it's a feminine gender, then laudata est. Laudati sumus in masculine, and in feminine laudate sumus. Laudati estis and laudati sunt. So we can see that it's in a way easier to come up with the correct form for the perfect tense than for the imperfect tense. One other thing that should be mentioned is that the infinitive is different. In English we only have one infinitive, to speak, to praise, and so on. But in Latin we have various infinitives, and the passive infinitive is different from the active infinitive. The active infinitive is laudare, but the passive infinitive is laudari. So laudare is to praise, laudari is to be praised. So the active infinitives are laudare, videre, dicere, audire. But the passive infinitives are laudari, videri, dici, audiri. So we can see that the endings are different. And also the imperative is interesting. You may recall that the imperative in Latin is different from singular and plural. The singular imperative for laudare is lauda, and the plural is laudate. For videre is vide, and plural videte. For dicere is dic, or dicite, plural. And for audire is audi, and plural is audite. These are the active imperatives. But the passive imperative is different. The passive imperative for laudare is laudare. It's identical to the infinitive. So out of context we could tell when we distinguish the meaning of it in context. Laudare means be praised in singular, and in plural it's laudamini. You all go ahead and be praised. Laudamini. So the four verbs that we were talking about, the passive infinitive is in singular laudare, videre, dicere, audire. Notice that they sound, their form is identical to the infinitive present tense. And in plural, the passive imperative is laudamini, videmini, dicimini, audimini. Be heard, be praised, you all be seen, you all be spoken about, you all be heard of. So sometimes you may see a form that appears to be the infinitive of a given verb, but it might be the imperative passive. So with this, I close this little 15 minutes a day of Latin, and given another opportunity, we will speak about a subject that's related to this, but we couldn't have covered it until we have spoken about the passive forms. Valeatis quam optime.